From the Oklahoma newsroom, it's time for the Orange Alert, our weekly segment about OSU football to get you ready for Saturday's game. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with OSU beat writer Scott Wright, and joining us on the phone here in a minute will be Barry Trammell, who's actually very close to where the Cowboys will be on Saturday. Pittsburgh is the game site against Pitt, 11 o'clock kick on ESPN. And guys, let's talk about this rematch. We saw these two teams get together last year, Scott, in Stillwater. And frankly, I have to think there are some Pitt defenders and defensive coaches that have nightmares about that game because James Washington went crazy, frankly. What will Pitt do differently against James Washington in this pass offense on Saturday?
That's the big question right now. You know, Pat Narduzzi came out early in the week and admitted, okay, we're going to have to do something different. And this is a guy who sticks with his defense. He does what he does, and he runs the quarters is what they call his defense that he is so known for, and that's the defense he runs. And you know, he says now, I cannot defend this Oklahoma State team that way. So I'm going to have to do something different. We don't know what that'll be. It'll obviously be something that Mason Rudolph and the gang have not seen on video at this point. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they try to attack this Oklahoma State offense this weekend.
Nearly 300 yards of passing yards last year for James Washington alone. There's a picture of him catching a deep pass. I think we've used it about a gazillion times, but the Pitt defender is way behind him, and this look of, oh no, I've let him by me again. Barry, you were there when Pat Narduzzi talked about James Washington earlier this week, the Pitt coach talking about this matchup. He admitted this is different, and he didn't think it was different. That's a little surprising. What does he have up his sleeve to try to defend this guy this time?
Well, I mean, he didn't say anything, but he's going to have to put a safety over the top. There's nothing else you can do. There's a lot of ways to defend the line of scrimmage, and a lot of ways to defend the flat and the short pass. But if you want to defend the deep ball, you got two options: man-to-man with your corner, or give him some help. And they're going to have to give him some help. The problem that OSU provides people is if you want to shade a safety over there to help on James Washington, well, you got Chris Lacey or Tyron Johnson or Marcel Aitman capable of going down the other sideline for a deep ball. So it's a tough assignment for defense. And Pitt last year decided, hey, let's just try to match up with these guys, and they paid for it. So I believe they're going to have to put safeties over the top, and that means that OSU running game should be some easy pickings.
Yeah,
and not only that, Barry, but when you start moving a safety outside, it leaves your linebackers possibly in coverage on some of those inside guys like Dylan Stoner or Justice Hill out of the backfield, and could open up the passing game in the middle of the field as well. And Pitt had trouble containing Saquon Barkley as a receiver in their game against Penn State over the weekend. So that could be an area where a guy like Justice Hill could really get involved. We saw him catch 4 passes at South Alabama and really start to get involved there. It could be a game where he gets open over the middle and does some damage as a receiver too.
Well, and Barry, let's talk about Justice Hill as a receiver for a second, because I mean, pretty clearly a year ago he was a surprise guy as a running back. Carried a heavy load for the Cowboys out of the backfield, but now we're starting to see this dual ability. As Scotty mentioned, 4 passes against South Alabama, a guy that looks like he can add to that passing attack. What kind of dimension does this add in your mind for the Oklahoma State offense?
Well, OSU's always, or not always, but in recent years has always made a lot of strong yardage, throwing guys out of the backfield, whether it's Joe Randall or Keith Toston, going back a ways. Vernon Morency was really good coming out of the backfield. So that's always a nice little development when you can bring those guys out. I recommend it highly for Justice Hill because it's frankly he's got somebody chirping on his feet because there's some good players coming up. I don't know that Justice Hill is going to be one of those 80-play guys. I think he's going to have to share that position, and the more he does, the more the Cowboys are going to say, "Hey, let's ride Justice a little bit longer."
Yeah, and he's definitely, like you mentioned, J.D. King, L.D. Brown, who I've finally got their names put together the right way. You guys with these initials are killing me. But yeah, definitely some talented youngsters behind Justice Hill. But, we talk about, Scott, the James Washington factor in this game, Justice Hill out of the backfield. They're going to throw a lot of weapons at Pitt in the passing game. Who's your receiver with a big game this week? Who do you like in this whole thing?
I really think that Chris Lacey is just waiting for his breakout game. I think that this is a guy with NFL talent, NFL skill, and I think that he's been on the verge of having some big games. He had that drop against Tulsa that kind of derailed things early for him, and he never really seemed to find his footing after that. But he got things going a little bit at South Alabama. I think that this is the week when he really becomes the guy that can be the go-to guy if they try to take away James Washington, or they try to help more in other areas. I think that he has a chance to have a really big game.
Yeah, Chris Lacey's definitely had some 100-yard games during his career. Marcel Aitman had 2 touchdown catches at South Alabama. Probably should have had a third. He even admitted as much, Barry. Tyron Johnson, who you mentioned earlier. Who you going for with the big game this week, Barry?
I think I will go with. I think I'll go with Jalen McCleskey. I think what Scotty talked about, how you drop those safeties and it opens up the interior. McCleskey lives on the crossing patterns and the slants and the little dump passes. Should be a lot of room to run when Pitt is protecting deep. And we're all saying all this, and the truth of the matter is the most likely guy to have a home run day is James Washington,
right.
The guy that they're out there, designed to stop. But I think if it's somebody else, I think McCleskey is primed to find a lot of open spaces on Heinz Field.
Yeah, James Washington, despite what everybody knows about him so far this season, and what I'm sure that South Alabama, maybe to a lesser extent because they were more set up to stop the run, but you look at those first 2 games, people are trying to stop him. He already has 3 touchdown catches of 40+. 3 of 40+. That's pretty big. I'm sure Pitt would try to keep that number at 3, but that guy is having a monster season already. As we get ready to wrap up here on Orange Alert, let's talk for a second about the defense because, Scott, this is, if there's an area for Pitt to be concerned about the passing game, the area that OSU has to be concerned about is linebacker. They lost a couple guys to injury. First half without Calvin Bundage. How do they adjust with those guys gone at the linebacker position? Well,
Mike Gundy said, the depth chart got shuffled around a little bit. They've got Kirk Tucker is most likely going to be the starter unless Kenneth Edison Magruder has healed up and is ready to go and play the outside linebacker position, which we don't know. They've been calling him day to day since the injury occurred. We'll see what happens there. But Kirk Tucker is going to be heavily involved, especially in the first half with Bundage out because of the suspension. Kevin Henry is out as the backup on the other side, meaning the guy like Josiah Kim, a career backup and a special teams guy who loves these opportunities, is going to be jumping in there and playing probably a lot of different positions, possibly all 3 different positions as a backup guy. They're going to really rely on a guy like Justin Phillips with his speed. The thing about this Pitt offense is that they use so much motion and so much pre-snap movement that you've really got to be focused on your keys and what's going on in front of you so that you know where to be and where to be going. They also have a lot of speed. They can get to the outside, and so the speed of those linebackers to keep containment and turn guys back inside is going to be really important.
Barry, when you think about this linebacker situation, do you point to a guy like Chad Whitener and say he's really got to be extra locked in against Pitt? Or do you say, hey, listen, defensive line's deep. You've got to have more push from them, and they sort of pick up some slack with those linebackers missing out there. What do you sort of point to as key to make up for these guys that aren't going to be out there?
I think I got to point to Glenn Spencer. When you get that thin at a position, you got to figure out ways to make other guys work. And I don't mean, I don't recommend trying to beat Pitt with a 3rd-team linebacker. I think you try to beat Pitt with more of a standard nickel package. Play 5 DBs much more, so that you only have 2 linebackers on the field. It's not ideal against a team that has a physical reputation like Pitt does. We'll find out if that's deserved. But I think you got to get your best players on the field, and right now, OSU's best 11 defenders do not include 3 linebackers. So I think you're likely to see more of the 4-2-5. Try to do some wrinkles to make that work. I think this is a big week for Glenn Spencer.
You know, Scott, as I think about that, the position that in my mind has the most depth, I'll go back to that defensive line. I mean, they've played, you know, a lot of guys on that defensive line, but they really don't have sort of those guys that have stepped back as much. Is there a possibility that you could see more of a focus on maybe putting a guy like Billy Lavini out there who can maybe be a little bit more agile? Is that maybe a wrinkle Glenn Spencer could point to?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a guy like Jordan Brailford, who is incredibly athletic. They really go about 9 deep on that defensive line, or 9 guys that they feel comfortable being in their primary rotation. And I think that they're going to need those guys to be physical and fast, and fill gaps and all of those things that defensive coordinators like to say, right, and be gap sound. And
right.
But that's going to be important against an offensive line that can open some holes and use that misdirection to their advantage.
Does Barry, does the offense have to help in any way with slowing down at all? Do you say to Mike Yursich, hey, listen, we need to let this defense rest. We need to give these guys some assistance. You mentioned Glenn Spencer being on the hook, but is there a flip side that maybe the offense has to draw things out a little bit with this defensive situation at the linebacker position?
I think the offense is under the gun because of the linebackers, but not from a tempo standpoint, just from a scoring standpoint. I think they need to score, and I don't think this is necessarily a game you can try to win 24-20. I think they need some big numbers put up. If they get into the high 30s or 40s, it's going to be difficult for Pitt to take advantage of the Cowboys, no matter who's playing linebacker. But if this is just a so-so game for the OSU offense, well, then all of a sudden, those linebackers are under the gun in pressure situations. It's a lot easier to play defense when you're up 28-14 than when you're up 28-27. So that to me is the Cowboy offense sort of needs to come through in this game. The defense has played well through 2 games, but it's not really been tested. We'll find out later in the year, and maybe find out some Saturday, what caliber of defense this is. We know the OSU offense can produce. We know it's prolific. We know that it can put up big points. Saturday is the time to do so.
Yep, definitely some intrigue as it relates to this game. Again, 11 o'clock kick, ESPN on Saturday, Pitt and OSU in Pittsburgh. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.